These days, life can get pretty hectic. A sigh of relief is just a tap away with WDAV Classical Public Radio, your classical oasis. You can stream classical music anywhere, anytime with the WDAV mobile app. You'll also get access to podcast episodes, blog articles, and more carefully curated content that deepens your connection to the music you love. Download the WDAV mobile app now at wdav.org/app. Or if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, tune your radio to 89.9 FM. Boulanger Initiative exists to advocate for women, non-binary, and trans composers of all genders. Women and gender marginalized music creators are vital to the survival of orchestral, chamber, solo, and choral music and are the future of the music industry. Executive orders banning DEI initiatives and attempts to erase LGBTQ plus voices threaten the work behind their mission. Boulanger Initiative refuses to back down and invites us to stand by them. Visit boulangerinitiative.org. That's BOULANGER to show your support during Women's History Month. Every voice deserves to be heard, celebrated, and empowered, now and always. Silence is no longer an option. I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in, and happy penultimate day of Women's History Month if you're catching this on the day that this comes out. I want to shout out everybody that I was just on the ground with in Bloomington, Indiana for earshot readings. Thank you for doing your part to decolonize classical music as composers. Very, very, very important work, and work that I've been honored to do for almost 3 years now with the folks at the American Composers Orchestra. So shout out everyone. Shout out to everyone in Bloomington, to Jeff, my contact there, and becoming a great friend, all the mentors, again, all the participants. So thank you. Really great time at Indiana University for me this past week. Also, Eid Mubarak. Shout out to everybody who's been fasting and observing Eid. Hope it's been a useful and beneficial fast for you. Glad that we can support you as well. You know, my own spiritual practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo has been more vital for me than ever lately, especially considering some of the recent arts news to come out of Washington in the past few days. So I'll be saying a few words on that in today's Triloquy. But for now, I have to introduce you to a guest who's been a long time coming to the Triloquy podcast. It is my absolute honor to welcome Jessie Montgomery into the Triloquy family. I'm not sure what there is for me to say about Jessie, to be honest. If you're in this so-called classical music world, there's no way you've never heard of her. She's one of the most performed living composers in the game right now, period. She's a recent Grammy Award winner, and she's living proof of what's possible for Black women and women in general in the field. Just last week, I went down to Carnegie and enjoyed some of her music there, performed by some Juilliard students. And she actually has a performance by the New York Philharmonic coming up in early April that I can't wait to check out. If you're going to be in New York in April, I think it's April 9th through 11th, I'll have a link in the description for you to get tickets and to support Jessie Montgomery's work. I think there's some Stravinsky on that program as well, so I'll definitely be staying for the whole thing. So I think it's going to be a good program. But yes, shout out to Jessie Montgomery. I'm so proud to have collaborated with her in the past through my work with the American Composers Orchestra, collaborated with her through Sphinx, and also just getting to know her as a human being, a really beautiful human being out here. And, you know, again, someone whose presence on the Triloquy podcast I can't share enough gratitude about. So thank you, thank you, thank you. In our conversation, we do, of course, talk about her life and some of her upcoming performances, but we also get into some of the unique challenges of having a really big profile in classical music. Sometimes it feels good to just be anonymous, as Nas and Lauryn Hill said in a track one time, "A place to be nobody." But when you're Jessie Montgomery, it's just not possible. So we get into that and lots more. And I can't wait to share that with you here. To get us into my chat with Jessie Montgomery, I'm going to share an excerpt from her Grammy award-winning composition called Rounds. This is music for solo piano and strings, featuring here the strings of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra with pianist Awadajan Pratt. Maestro Nazir McFadden, who's been on the show, shout out to Nazir, leads this performance from the podium. Black on black on black performance here to get us into my chat with Jessie. Thanks again for listening.
I certainly didn't envision all of what's going on now. No, there's no way. It all happened very organically and very sort of, just sort of pacing myself and taking each opportunity as it came and kind of maintaining that attitude of, if you keep working, if you build it, they will come, and just like, keep doing your work how you want to do it with the people in your closest range.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't even, I think, when I started even composing, I had aspirations for writing for certain types of ensembles and for like sort of having certain types of experiences within the composing itself. But in terms of like the total scale of what I'm dealing with now, I mean, I'm self-published. I run all of my catalog myself with a team of people, of course. I have, very active catalog to maintain and watch over, and also maintain all of these performances and other kinds of like residencies and activities like that. I mean, all of those, all of this in total did not, I did not even, I don't even think aspire for, to be honest.
Wow.
But, but I, and so I take it all I try to put what I can into it and use it, to continue to generate work and use it to my benefit and to the benefit, hopefully, of others down the road.
Yeah.
I certainly was like, a violinist, aspiring performer, essentially, to start out with. I knew I wanted to do chamber music. I knew certain things that I was like drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, in blind faith, went towards those things really heavy, and then, and I have been fortunate to have doors that were opened along the way for me to walk through and keep expanding what I do, from performing to composing to collaborating to all these things, curating, and all the wonderful things that have come from over the past few years.
I love your use of the phrase blind faith. I feel like we don't talk about that enough, because when we're music students, really in that practice room, wearing out those excerpts or whatever, we have faith that something will happen when statistically nothing should happen,
which is like totally not right, which is like also something that I advise people against, right? Like, like, don't just go by blind faith. Obviously, you've got directed faith, it's directed towards action, right? That's one thing, at least, that I think we realize once we get into it.
When I think about looking at things in retrospect, I always am reminded of lyrics by a rapper whose name we aren't supposed to be saying these days, but but he has a lyric. There are times when I wish I was where I was when I used to wish I was here. What that makes me think about is, for me personally, I love going to concerts. It's come to a point where any concert that I go to, I'm at work all of a sudden, whether like a composer recognizes me and wants to know how they can get on, or a funder is, and not to begrudge any of that. It's just a
Mhm.
reality. I can no longer be a face in the crowd in those spaces.
Yep.
I imagine
Mhm.
that's very much the case for you as well. I wonder how you deal with the that privilege. I'll use that word, that privilege.
Right. It is. It is. And it's, I've tried to at first, look at it as, okay, this is a wonderful thing to be embraced by the community and people feel like, this conversation is appropriate in this, very communal setting, like where everybody's showing up and sort of equal footing going to this concert. And so, people soliciting you on different levels or sort of asking, what's the asking your input on certain maybe industry concerns and things like that, whatever. Um, but I think I like that aspect sometimes, where it feels like, oh yeah, we're doing the work everywhere we go, and that feels like enriching and inspiring sometimes. And sometimes you just want to go and like be an audience member and enjoy the music. And but I think I don't know, I've sort of accepted that aspect of it, so that I don't get too annoyed. It can be confronting, to have so many people, around. But you just kind of lean in. I think I subvert it my own way sometimes. I may just show up to the concert in jeans and stuff and
Yep.
just not, you know, and just um, try to lay low as much as you can or something. But I I think yeah, I try not to shy away from it when I because I know people, they put a lot of sort of trust or interest in your being there, and makes them feel good that you're supporting the thing they're supporting. And I think that's important for everyone to feel connected in some way. But it is a lot of, yeah, if you're just kind of in a mood, um, and you're like, I just want to hear the music,
I mean,
and comment on it and not share my opinion about it. And just, yeah.
there are times for me when, and I'll be transparent. One of my favorite things to do in a former life was, to have a little cannabis or something so that I'm really like enjoying the concert experience.
Yeah.
But again, every time I walk into a concert hall these days, I feel like I'm at work, and not to complain
Right.
about it. But it's just, I think it's an aspect that a lot of people don't think about, as we all
Mhm.
aspire to whatever we're aspiring toward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there becomes a bit of responsibility into where you sort of your, whatever people's expectations might be of you, you sort of feel like maybe you have to demonstrate that on some level, even if you're not quite there internally. But
Do you feel like winning the Grammy sort of upped that circumstance, that sort of a contextualization for you? I mean, those of us who know you, we've always known you, but I imagine the Grammy put you on even more people's radar.
it did put me on more people's radar. I think, there was already a lot of sort of steam around the pieces that had been, circulating. And so yeah, I did feel that a bit. But I think I was sort of at this turn when it happened. It's weird. I think when this Grammy award happened, it's sort of happened at this turn where I'm like really starting to try to be a little bit more self-preserving, a little bit more sort of conscientious about how I spend my energy and stuff like that. Like that all was happening around the same moment, and continues,
Mhm.
evolutionary process. As we know. And so I think, yeah, it did bring more attention. But I think what it did was it made me feel like I could be a little bit more discerning, a little bit more like, oh, okay, well, if you think somebody's the super hot stuff, then you can be ever more elusive.
Yeah.
And so like I treated it a bit that way. And I do have like a wonderful team of people that like help me stay in people's minds, and help keep the train moving when I can't. So I relied on that a lot this year. Yeah.
Yeah, you have officially spoken into the same microphone as Beyonce. So
Okay.
congratulations. That's just
Right. 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 That's right. I didn't even think about that. God.
So, one thing that I found really interesting about the bio on your website is the use of the phrase radical New York cultural scene. That's how you describe what you came up in. There's a lot of conversation around what you know, what New York is as opposed to what it used to be. I wonder how you think about that as it relates to your trajectory. Were there radical aspects of New York that played a huge role in your development that may not be there or are still there just here in the culture of the city?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was a time, it was the late, it was the 80s and 90s. Late 70s was when my parents moved to the East Village, and then I was born in 81. And so it was that time. It's when artist activism was, it was just part of all of the housing crisis, all of the anti-establishment performance art and music, pop music, and MTV, and all of this stuff was happening at that same time. And so there was a little. I feel like it was the direct connection between an artist's voice, the art that they were making, and who they were directing it to, was right kind of on the surface, and part of the daily talk,
Mm,
and I think um that was what was radical about it. It felt like immediate. It felt um, strong and loud and fervent, and people were ready to make moves and stuff like that. And it did. A lot of things changed around that time, right? A lot of that was I part of why I live where I live is because of the housing developments that were happening because of the work of community activism artists um, participating in that movement. And so, yeah, I think that cultural kind of energy is something that um, is part of my foundation in a lot of ways, and something that I think I'm seeking that connection. I think from and studying having to study classical music. It took me. It's now I feel like I'm sort of pulling my way back to what that means for my life and in our times. And here we are, in this crazy time. And I'm reevaluating a lot of how to connect with that feeling again, that feeling of the the artist creating the art. What it's either like in direct reflection of, or in direct opposition to, or in subversion to what's happening politically. That's you have like that I have been aware of these connections. I've been aspired for these connections. I've tried to find my way in them. But now it's just more. It's just like more digging closer to that direct connection. And so I can't say that I'm in it. I'm figuring it out right now. I'm kind of, and I know that's sort of where one of your questions that was coming along the way, um, in some sense. But yeah, I think that I'm grateful for to have had that sort of blueprint as to what it can look and feel like, and the result of what it looks and felt like was people getting together. It was a lot of people getting together, dance, sing, poetry, just getting up and yelling in a communal space, like um, uh, and that just like letting the expression come through the art, and the rallying kind of come through that different channel. So I think we are going to see that. I hope we start to see more of that again. I have like that's I just want to see more communal art spaces drumming up from all this craziness. And yeah.
and I think that's for me, that's one of the unique things about New York. I've lived in a lot of cities around the United States, we'll compare New York to another city a little later in the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
But just just to highlight what you're saying about people getting together, as big of a city as New York is,
Hmm.
I think it's easier in New York than in some other places that I've lived to really break into that community, to see how people are collaborating and meeting for coffee, meeting for resistance, meeting for whatever. I think that's one of those unique things about New York that's really there. But you mentioned your parents, and I want to pull on that string
Hmm.
a little bit. When I think about my own upbringing versus now, of course, my parents and my family, they're really excited about the work that I do. They, fully supportive. But when I was a kid, they just didn't and couldn't have had the context to understand how a kid bringing a bassoon home can end up something worthwhile to a community.
Yeah.
That was the case for you, or were your
Uh-huh.
parents musicians? I wonder if you'll speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so my dad's a musician. My mom was a playwright and poet and actress director. And they had a band when I was young. So, and the band it was called Sedition Ensemble.
Mm,
Uh,
I like that.
and yeah, yeah, they had a band. There's some videos online if you get curious. Sedition Ensemble. They released an album in 1984, I want to say, that got re-released maybe like 10 years ago. Anyway, so but they sort of had a, if again, like if we just saturate our lives with the thing that we're doing, which is, their respective ways of creating art, she'll pick up, she'll figure it out somehow. And I did. I mean, I did, but the thing was, is I started violin super young and at 4, yeah. And it was more like a thing that I did, that as long as it was like, it was my thing that and pretty much early on, I was practicing on my own, like by probably like maybe age 7, I was already like, I had the routine down and I knew how to, when it was music time, I could just do that. And it felt normal because that's what my parents were doing. Like my house was just somebody in the corner writing a play and the other person my dad is also a composer, and he was always in a corner writing music, so it was like this very free and yet seriously focused on art making vibe,
Yeah.
which has basically been my vibe. um, so
It's like you grew
um,
up in a salon.
literally, yeah, I could say that. I could say that. And so and so in a lot of ways, it was very, like, in a way, organic. And my parents didn't really have to push me in music. I found my people in it pretty soon. Like by junior high school, I had like my friends that are still my friends, that are like, we're having a composition class reunion
Oh,
in April in New York. It's so cute. I know our old uh, former composition teacher is inviting a bunch of us together to just have a party. Like it's very cute, like a reunion party. So like, yeah, and it was New York, it was Third Street Music School. They had a wonderful community there. And so there were a lot of things that were set up that sort of let me be however I wanted to be in music. And I'm grateful for that. I mean, it was just the right setup, I had great teachers. My mom, being a teacher herself, had a keen sense for um, pedagogy, teachers and schools, the right schools and stuff like that. So all of that was very well set up for me.
when I think
Yeah.
when I think about the degree to which community and collaboration has always played a role in your development, I can't help but to think about the role that you've played in the establishment of two really incredible string quartets. I was aware of your history with the Catalyst Quartet, but I didn't know
Mhm.
that you also had a history with the Public Quartet.
Oh yeah.
That's
Mhm.
really exciting. I wonder how how that impacts your today, even though you aren't actively playing in those groups. Were there aspects of forming and participating in those groups that impact your compositional style or your artistic process or anything along those lines?
Absolutely. Yes. And it can't be overstated. The Well, I'll start with um, well, first before Public Quartet, I was playing in what was the Providence String Quartet in Providence when I was working with Community Music Works, right after my undergrad, and I was there for 5 years. We played together and rehearsed and performed. That was like a bit of, taking on standard rep and like sort of getting my first experiences with playing with professional quartet, and regular concerts and stuff. And then when I moved back to New York, I was among the four. Me, Amanda Gookin, Curtis, and Nick were all um, forming Public Quartet together during that time. And it was, again, also a very organic process, also very like coming into it from a very um, sort of just eyes wide open kind of place, not really knowing which way we were going to go, but we knew we liked playing music together. And so, yeah, and the work that ended up coming through with Public Quartet, with the collective improv, doing interesting arrangements, and sort of bridging stylistic elements. Um, all of that has, I mean, I don't think I can describe quite how it's affected my music. I just know it has
Yeah.
in so many ways that probably aesthetically, like there's probably like, a feeling or like a visceral quality to my pieces that I think reflect the type of work that we did in Public Quartet. Certainly influenced my philosophy on like whether to, fixed music versus open music, open-ended music, which I totally like got from working with Public Quartet. Um, and then um, and then also the idea of like creating things on your own terms.
Right.
That was the thing that really happened was with both Public and Catalyst, sort of dealing with a very classical music forward, old, some traditional, let's say, classical music audiences most of the time, and introducing them to underrepresented composers and music from composers that were outside the canon, so to speak, and music that we just felt moved by as a group of four individuals, like going with our instincts in that sense, rather than like, oh, let's make sure that we're covering all these bases in terms of traditional repertoire. Like on both of those quartets, at some point, we went through that process of doing the traditional thing, realizing, oh, there's more here to do, and then just going for it and pushing up against presenters who said, oh, I don't think our audience is going to like that, and saying, no, 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 absolutely, they're going to love it. And they always did. That was the thing. We always got the confirmation. And I think in that way, yeah, I'm proud of that influence that we had, like I think on audiences and hopefully on other quartets who want to expand their repertoire and want to feel like they have agency in their own programming, and it's like a collaborative discussion between the presenter, the proposed audience, and their own interests,
Mhm.
and this is something that they can actually do and still be a successful quartet, and bring the industry to them. I think that was the lesson in that. Hmm.
So after all of the success and impact you were able to build in New York and along the East Coast, you did the unthinkable, picked up everything and moved to Chicago. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and really specifically on on this community artists aspect front we've been circling around.
Sure.
Not being from New York, I've often thought about how we can decenter New York in a way when it comes to new music and activation and creation. Having lived here for a little while now, I sort of get it and have become a little New York centric. So, to
Mhm.
see the degree to which you've fallen in love with Chicago, I find really fascinating. I wonder if you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's let's see. So my ultimate decision to move here was just it was the right time for me to make that kind of a move. And I had been feeling, the thing is at the end of the day, I grew up in New York, and not everybody has to leave their home, but I have always felt like, like, yeah, tethered to New
Sure.
York, you know? And that's like the worst thing for me. That's not equal. That's against my, I think, personal constitution. I think that's like, and so yeah, so that was one reason. And then also just wanting to feel like I can create my own space. I'm always looking for that. It's, to create more quiet in my life. It's definitely a slower city. I do not advise anyone who comes to Chicago for any reason, do not advise you to be in a rush. Not be, do not be in a haste, because it will just drive you crazy. Um, and so you're kind of forced to slow down. You're forced to sort of, um, yeah, just kind of be a little bit more easy about the planning of my day. I have to like really, I have to give the proper amount of time for certain errands and for certain things so that I can approach it without haste. So anyway, so it's like that I sort of sensed that, and I was like, you know what, this is gonna force me to slow down in some very practical, very like everyday ways, which is good. Like, let's just deal with one layer at a time. So for me, like, and that's been great. And also, not to mention, like you said, when you're in New York, I love all my colleagues and friends forever, like forever, my dear friends in New York. It does end up getting a little bit of a spin cycle,
Sure.
right? And you know what? Same thing here in Chicago. It has its own spin cycle, but it's new to me. So I'm having a fun time discovering who's here, who's doing what, where all the channels are, and how to, sort of what makes sense as far as like where I can contribute and add to what's there. Whereas in New York, it doesn't feel, you can't, it's adding to something that's already so massive. So I think here, I feel closer to that feeling that I was describing earlier about like, okay, there's people sort of still drumming up really, there's a lot of room for fresh ideas. And there's also, I see the space, like maybe this is overstating it, but the vastness of being in the Midwest, like the open plains of possibility or something. There's something about that too, that in physical dimension feels like there's more possibility here. And in terms of developing something new, something maybe unexpected, or where my mind can wander into other ways of creating work and other ways of creating community. So
Not to mention, of course, the history of Black women in music that Chicago
that
is known for.
and the history of the classical music scene here, of course. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
if I see you on social media celebrating Chicago pizza more than New York pizza, I'll send you a DM. But until then, I think everything's fine.
Okay. Yeah, that I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare cry. I don't, yeah, I don't, I'm starting to, it's apples and oranges at the end of the day. I'm sorry. It just can't, there's no the only comparison, it's an old, at one point they were vying for the number of skyscrapers or something, but that's long gone.
Yep.
They're two very different places, very, very different customs, respect.
Yeah. Well, I do want to move on to talking about a little bit of music. And before we talk about some of your upcoming performances and projects, I want to talk about some of your most performed works. I want to give a shout out to Judd Greenstein. A few years ago on Twitter, he created this really funny thread about the prevalence of his work Change and how everyone always goes straight to it. I'm sure every composer has that piece that everyone performs. From my perspective, for you, that's either Strum or maybe Banner. I wonder what your relationship is with these works that are so often performed, considering the number of things that you've created for orchestra.
Yeah, so Strum also exists in string quartet form, string quintet form, and has many adaptations. And so I have noticed that anytime, and like somebody comes up to me and is like, "Oh, I played Strum this summer," I have a physical like retract, because I've because which is not fair to the person at all, because their enthusiasm is meaningful, but it's just like, yeah, it does. It starts to feel also like it's like something that you've done a long time ago that like just follows you around, and it's like becomes a little sibling that you just want to kick to the side. You're like,
Sure.
I appreciate you, but like, please leave me alone. Yeah. Um, but I what can I say? I mean, I think the appeal of the piece, I totally get. I'm performing it myself for the first time in quite a while. I'm performing it at a small
Wow.
private in a couple of weeks. Um, and and it's rare that I do that, but if I do it and I'm performing it with like close friends of mine, it's fun, and they sort of all get the joke about it, and it's fine.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, I definitely feel that way about those pieces. Banner um has actually evolved in my mind a bit in terms of how it the meaning of it, but and we can talk about that. But I just yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I think if you have a hit, you have a hit, and I think
Yep.
I don't want to frown on that. I think that's a wonderful thing. Thank you everybody for playing Strum. And it's like a good summer camp piece. It's a good one movement for, and in part, in part, I mean, that's also another thread to talk through. But in part, I do envision my certain aspects of my music and certain pieces as potentially pedagogical tools that have within them another major influence from being in the string quartet world, in the influence of like pedagogical tools and musical sort of idioms that can be reflected with a young quartet that's learning traditional repertoire alongside contemporary music. And I've always had that kind of desire to connect those things. And even now, even as I've been at it for some time, I'm realizing I'm still um, have a desire to speak to that particular thread um, of of um, one's goals in technique, and then in also recognizing new music and getting inspired by new music, and then having like teachers having alternate tools to add to their toolkit
Mm.
um, for different training purposes, different stages of development, et cetera, et cetera. So, I like that that's where that piece fits
Yeah.
to say, yeah, yeah. So, and also programmatically, it's like a good 7-minute opener. And what can I
Yep. Yep. So sitting
say?
so sitting next to works like Strum that everyone is familiar with, there are new works like Chemiluminescence. Am I pronouncing that right? Chemiluminescence.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to the upcoming performance of that by the New York Philharmonic. I wonder what this piece brings to the front that some of your former pieces may not bring to the front, or how audiences who feel like they're really familiar with your artistic output, what they should be thinking about as they listen to this new work.
Actually, what's interesting about this piece, chemiluminescence, by the way, you can Google it, but it's basically it's any light source that comes from a non-light originating light source.
Hmm.
Bioluminescence falls under the category of chemiluminescence. Um,
Wow.
so it's the idea that, so it was just it was a start. Honestly, it was a starting point for me to think about. Um, I mean, originally when I started writing the piece, it's a string orchestra piece, right? Strings are a happy place for me. And I thought, well, what can I do with the string orchestra that maybe I haven't done before, or go deeper? Actually, I think this piece goes maybe a little deeper into some of the, if I dare say, trends or like the elements of my music that are consistent.
Hmm.
Like, um, so, in terms of the blend, in terms of the harmony, in terms of the balance of the voicings within the string orchestra. At some points, it's written for an adaptable size of strings, so it's written for from 18 players up.
Hmm.
Um, co-commission with also some the Sphinx organization, for example. Sphinx Virtuosi is an 18 person ensemble, and so yeah, it's a lot of sort of, I think, digging into what I think might maybe my own string idiom may be. So I think they might find that actually. But it's just that, like, there's no thematic. The only thematic thing is like light that comes out of nowhere, light that's comes from non-light. I think it's a little bit abstract, and I like having those offshoots within my work that are kind of more abstract, maybe in original concept, but the music itself is um, has some deep kind of rhythmic elements and some rich, long harmonic lines that are happening. And yeah, and I think it's another really like a rich exploration of the tones of the orchestra. And this is going to be the full string complement of the New York Phil, so I'm really excited to hear how that like amplifies some of the ideas that I'm going for.
Yeah, yeah. As a longtime classical radio host, I have a lot of practice in stretching the idea of a piece of music to connect it to other things,
Hmm.
to help
Sure.
audiences sort of. So what I think
Hmm.
about when you're talking about light coming out from nowhere, I'm thinking about audience members who proverbially come out of nowhere when it comes to this sort of new music. Every time I'm at a concert, an opera that features a woman composer or works by Black composers, 100% of the time, I run into someone during intermission who has never gone to a concert before.
Hmm.
It's their
Hmm.
first time, and they say, "Well, I saw that this Black woman's piece of music was programmed, so
Hmm.
I wanted to come support." I wonder if you take on any of that responsibility, or think about that at all as you're writing music, as you're forming partnerships with orchestras. To what degree is your being a Black woman and that impacting who comes to the show? To what degree does that impact your thinking or your process, if at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's so many ways that I feel about that. I want to like I do I do think about who's listening. And I love that just my personage will bring someone into the theater. I don't take that for granted. That is a big deal. And I used to feel put on by having to be that representative, but I'm proud of it. I'm proud of being, if you don't know yet, and the only reason you're showing up is because you want to support your own community and you want to be a part of like understanding, what voices are sharing, who's sharing what about, and that it may connect with you in some way. That's beautiful. And I think, I think chemiluminescence in itself doesn't have any narrative or historical, cultural meaning at the outset, but I think that the vernacular of my music and certain elements speak to. I think the thing is that I'm not when I think that one of the things that people like, I get that a lot where people say, "Oh, I've never liked new music. I listen to your music and now I'm curious."
Mhm.
I think there's something. I love melody and I love repetitive rhythms. I love the basic, visceral qualities of like. I feel like that's what to me. That's why people are attracted to things, to
Mhm.
musical things. There's something that rhythmically resonates with them, and it's enough to conjure like thoughts and feelings. And a melody tells a story. A melody carries a message. As someone listens through an entire melody, they bring their own thoughts with it, and it supports, this sort of subconscious expansion. I'm saying this like as if I'm not a scientist, but I think that this is music. Like music is the drawing out. It draws people to and hopefully into themselves, and that's what I think music does. That's the part of music that I want to engage with for my own listening and my own experience, and also that I try to translate for others. And I think, and And so I don't have any particular agenda beyond that, except maybe in who I engage in and how, in the as far as the concert hall is concerned.
Mhm.
I am interested in people coming to the concert for whatever reason draws them in, and that once they get there, that they can find a way in somehow. And I don't mind being that bridge. It's fine. I don't have to be. I'm not. I never. The pursuit of music to me is all about that. It's about that communication that happens when a person goes out of their way to come sit down in a concert hall and listen, and they bring them their body and their mind to be present with the music. And I want to, I'm always going to be thinking about that. So that goes, beyond color, gender,
Mhm.
race, shape, place, etc. So hopefully that's the thing that really resonates in the end.
Your presence on concert programming doesn't only expand people's idea of who a composer is or who a composer can be, it also expands their proximity to some of the quote unquote traditional repertoire. Your
Mhm.
music always has some proximity to music of centuries ago. I wonder how you think about that personally. Do you, as a violinist, still
Mhm.
maintain proximity to some of the quote unquote traditional repertoire? Will we ever see you on stage in a violin section playing a Beethoven symphony? Is that a part of what you see for yourself moving forward?
You know what? I will always find ways to play the traditional rep because it's part of my muscles.
Hmm.
It's part of, it's there's in my muscle memory. And I enjoy a reading every now and again. I enjoy a chamber music scenario. I still have on my bucket list to do a recital of the Brahms violin sonatas, or at least or some kind of interesting, movement by movement kind of thing.
Hmm.
There is certain repertoire that I still have that thing of like, oh, I never learned the such and such concerto. Why don't I just have at it as now in this new phase of my life? I don't know. So I do, but I don't. I did play a festival in September where I played a bunch of in Norway. Actually, is the Trondheim Music Festival, Chamber Music
Oh yeah.
Festival, uh, where I played a whole week of concerts. Actually including Brahms sextet, one movement of Brahms, um, and some other. Oh gosh, it was a lot of different things we played. But and it was great. It was fun, But it's not the. I would say maybe that's like a 5% of what I do, and I do it when it feels appropriate to the total package of what's happening. But yeah, orchestra. I respect my orchestra people so much. I can't do it. I can't. I'm a goofball. I can't I'll be talking in rehearsal and and just trying to time myself out. Like
You need
so
a freer
it's
space, is what I'm hearing.
yeah. Yeah. And I've kind of always felt that way about orchestra. I always when I was my undergrad, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to do orchestra. And the funny thing is now I'm so much more connected to orchestras than I could have been even as a player.
Mhm.
And so that's been really interesting to sort of yeah, watch the machine work from all different kinds of angles.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I saved my two hard questions for the end, but before we get there, are there any upcoming projects or performances that you like to promote?
Oh yeah. Um when is this gonna air?
So folks will be hearing this end of March, so that this last week
Okay.
of March. Yeah, so
Okay, perfect.
anything April 2025 and beyond.
Cool, cool. Um, so I'm particularly excited about my debut of my band called the Everything Band.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So the Everything Band is premiering on my Miller Portrait concert on April 3rd. And this is a band that it lived in my mind only. Um, basically began maybe, I want to say 12 years ago or so, like something like that. And then slowly I started sort of talking about the idea with different people and with different colleagues. And yeah, and it ultimately became the Everything Band, which is essentially I knew that there was going to be a point when all of this, like writing on deadline, writing for orchestras, writing for prescribed things, was going to be challenging. I think, or on some level, I didn't want to get stuck in a loop or something like that.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to make sure I knew early on that having my own way to write, and like writing freely, and anyway, it was going to be important. So, and also making music with my friends. Everything Band is made up of all friends from mostly from college and some recently, but it's myself, Janina Norpoth, Gabe Cabezas, Eleanor Oppenheim, Jerome Jennings on drums, Gray McMurray on guitar, Lynn Ligamari on sax, and Allison Loggins Hall on flute.
Excellent.
Uh, yeah, and then we're also going to have a guest performance by Pascal Leboeuf as a guest.
Oh,
Uh, and so it's pretty much all of the people that I could ever fathom wanting to make music with. So we're having, and it's yeah, so it's sort of like my childhood dream of having a big band. That's if I had to describe it in short form. Um, but yeah, so a lot of improvisation, some pre-written stuff. So yeah, that's a really exciting group, really exciting project. So it allows a lot of flexibility musically. So that's April 3rd. Um, and beyond that, I have a few residencies that are happening with the Virginia Arts Festival. I'm excited to present Jorge Amado Molina on that festival. Wonderful. He's a Cuban composer who is now living here in Chicago. And and he just had a wonderful debut by the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. So I'm just excited to get his music down to Virginia. Um, and yeah, those are the immediate things. There's a cascade of wonderful things happening in the summer with some residencies and teaching residencies. But yeah, in terms of creatively, I'm excited to dive into my opera finally, write the story for that. I've learned over a sort of challenging process of figuring out who to collaborate with, that I needed to take another big step before I'm actually started working on the libretto and stuff. So anyway, I'm writing the story this summer for that. So anyway,
well, congratulations, and also looking forward to your performance with the New York Phil coming up. I'll be
of
there.
course, for the New York film. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
so we touched on your piece Banner a little earlier. This is a piece, as I'm sure you understand, a lot of people program as some sort of celebration or at the very least response to America, this idea of, all of us coming together. Considering what we're going through right now politically, I wonder if from your view, if it's time for an update to Banner. Are there program note changes that you would suggest to Banner? I wonder how you think about the context of that piece of music today.
Well, that piece, it was meant to be, you know, to to suggest that if we're going to celebrate the ideals of being quote unquote being a quote unquote American, um, which is freedom and equality for all, that it was, the piece highlights neighboring countries that we have had conflict with, and or communities that we have had political just fraught political history with. Um, and so I think if anything, the piece can expand and
Sure.
include more and more countries and places that we continue to have political issues with. Uh, and the concept of the piece, I think, original as it holds true, is, I mean, it's an ideal. The whole thing is an ideal that we're working towards, right? Or the whole the project of the United States of America. is something that it's gone off the rails and we have to get it back. You know, that's what they say. They want to get America back. I mean, what the heck does that? That means something so different to to so many people.
Right.
And find myself regurgitating some of this rhetoric, and it's alarming. But I do feel we do need to get it back to what we've all been working for, which is this equality, this ideal that we're actually seen as equals. But I mean, it seems ridiculous. I feel it feels lost to say it. You know, what do you do? What do you? I don't know if there's a piece of music that can solve that, or even address it. It's so big. Um, so if anything, I guess it's what are we celebrating? I
Right.
hate to like that, but the banner wasn't even meant to celebrate. It was meant to inspire like a new way of thinking about who's in on it, like who's in on this ideals, who is in on this conversation about equality.
Hmm.
How did we get to this conversation? Um, and why are we? How are like? Where's the fight? Why are we still? What brought us to the place where we're fighting for it in this way? I mean, we were still on track to keep fighting for it, and now we're fighting tooth and nail again. I guess you could say again. Our generation, I feel we were set up beautifully. I thought by our parents' generation in a lot of ways. I've had a lot of opportunities because of affirmative action, because of civil rights movement. I am a direct result of those things. And I don't know, it's daunting to think about what I think it's less about, writing a piece that speaks to it and more about this other aspect of what I'm thinking about community and where music draws people together, like music as a tool to draw people together in conversation and a community and comfort and process. And, where did these places exist? Where do they gather? I had this every morning. I have my morning rituals and I go on my big thinking. I open the day with big thinking. And, I thought, if we could, and this sounds silly now to say out loud because it always sounds more profound when you're by yourself in your own thoughts. But but if we had like a ballet scheduled, like a ballet performance on every corner of a neighborhood, like that would cause peace. Like it would be like, well, what the hell are we worried about? We got ballet on every corner. Like, let's keep generating connection and art, and let's keep generating those modes of communication and togetherness. And anyway, I want to I'm focusing on that. I'm trying to get my infrastructure together so I can start to implement projects that are more community based. And um, yeah, I don't know that
And why not a ballet on every corner? We have a liquor store on every corner. Another
it's one.
conversation, but you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm just, for real. Yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to ask, as more composers come to me who are in earlier stages of their career thinking about their trajectory, there's always this concern that they'll have to erase parts of themselves the more success that they have, the more people that see them, the more people that want to engage them. Maybe there are aspects of themselves or their activism that might offend certain funders or certain people. So again, just in closing, I wonder if you had any words or guidance for composers on their trajectory who look at someone like you and worry for themselves the degree to which they're able to take their whole selves on that journey of that trajectory.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, well, first of all, you don't figure any of this out ahead of time. Like you just do stuff. You do things because you're passionate to do them and it means something to you. And 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 the amount of it's true that the amount of work that you put in, as long as the conditions are right, you'll get it'll show up. Like it'll resonate. Um and once that starts to happen, hopefully you get to a point where it can generate on its own in some way. But at really, your work and your person, it's actually a hard question because I think for artists, like we identify so much with our work, like we can, like there's that mode of like, I am I am my values, my work, my aesthetic, my whatever. Um, I am, the communities that I engage with. And that is a lot to ask for sure. Um, but I still think I'm sort of aspiring to, um, it's more about time. I mean, hopefully you are your full self in every situation that you're in. I mean, and getting to know who you are and all those things are that's a whole journey that evolves that, again, you cannot plan, you cannot predict how life's going to come at you and where you're going to have to be challenged in your own view of yourself in the world and everything. Um, and so where is your integrity? Like, where does your integrity lie? Does your integrity lie in the relationships that you have, in the work that you create, in the way you keep your place, your home, the way you feel in a space? Like, what are the things that bring you that sense of grounding and purpose? And everything else has to sort of like bend around that. Um, and you learn to take time for yourself. You learn to have times for reflection, and friends and family. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's no like answer to that question really, right? It's the questions, like as long as we keep posing the question, then we can continue, we can grow with the question at each point. Um, but I think yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's you learn after time what integrity means for you. As long as you're cool with that, then all the other stuff can be worked on.
The tail end there of a work called Hymn for Everyone. Music, of course, by Jessie Montgomery, performed for you by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra under Riccardo Muti. Jessie is doing some great things in Chicago, but, she'll always be a New Yorker. So I'm glad that the two cities can share the benefits of her artistry, and so glad that I could share it with you today. Thank you, thank you, thank you to Jessie, to her team, and everyone who helped make this one possible. So, one of the things I love about Jessie is that she has this ability to equalize some of the feelings that I might be holding at any given moment. There's a joy that her music really ignites in me, and it offers some great balance for me when I'm thinking about other things like what's going on in Washington right now. So let's get into it, get into the Trilloquy. I'm going to read here from the San Francisco Chronicle, headline: Ex-Kennedy Center employee speaks on institution's toxicity after getting fired under Trump. The employee in question is Mark Bamuti Joseph, who hasn't been on Trilloquy, but has been behind some of the things that I've brought to Trilloquy, namely my involvement with the commission and premiere of a work called Breath, which was the Minnesota Orchestra's official response to the murder of George Floyd. I saw Bamuti perform at Lincoln Center about a week ago in response to January 6th. He had a reinterpretation of the Carnival of the Animals by Camille Saint-Saëns that I really appreciated. And even just before that performance, he and I spoke off the record about some of the happenings at the Kennedy Center. I'm naming all of this simply to affirm that, my personal perspective and experience, that, from my personal perspective and experience, this is someone whose artistry has long engaged the socio-political, and quite plainly and quite overtly. I know that there's always the opportunity to sort of jump into activist work when we have people like Trump in office. But Bamuti is someone who's been doing this for a while, not only from what I've read about him, but from personal experience. So just wanted to affirm that before I got into this. Um, yes, there's never been anything secretive or, under the radar about how he engages the world through his art. And right now we're seeing what happens under this sort of government that we have right now when that has been your work and your profile. Bamuti's let me just read here from the article. It says Bamuti's position as vice president and artistic director of social impact was one of several Kennedy Center jobs within the social impact team to be scrapped under President Donald Trump's leadership this week as the initiative is dismantled. During his time in the job, Bamuti helped launch the Culture Caucus, which offered 2-year residencies with organizations that worked with queer and trans youth, formerly incarcerated individuals, the disabled community, and more. He also established a national partnership program called Conflux, which worked with the National Arab Orchestra, the First Nations community, and World Pride, among others. Bamuti says here, this was a program that was growing in reference to the social impact team's outreach efforts. He says, noting that it went from 10,000 visitors to its program in 2021 to 65,000 in 2023. I'll have this linked in the description if you want to take a look at the entire thing, but I wanted to share that little portion because the work isn't even focused on any particular group, any particular marginalized group. This is social justice work in its broadest form as it relates to the arts. And yet this was some sort of threat to the folks in the White House, to the administration. In these past several weeks, I've been in rooms of so many organizations that are talking about things like whether or not going after federal funding is a good idea right now. The dialogue that I'm hearing revolve around the notion is covert action versus overt actions. And, there are arguments on both sides of that, I will say. But for people like Bamuti, fighting for justice in the shadows doesn't work. And it hasn't worked. And it's put him in this situation. I feel like it doesn't work for me either. As I chant and meditate on my best path forward, the path forward where I can have the most impact, I have to acknowledge that communities of resistors have to exist in a sort of multiplicity, and we have to exist in many different ways. The behind the scenes work is vital. I mean, this is true for the performing arts and social justice, right? But what is the behind the scenes without the stage and the folks actually in the limelight, as is true for many issues I bring up here? One of the longtime narratives of this podcast has been the importance of supporting those on the front lines because oftentimes they are the most vulnerable. It's so easy for us to find jobs and professions that don't pose a lot of risk to our ability to live and survive. And I think there's certainly a place for that. This is not me diminishing that, but so many people don't have that karma. So many people have to be the target for what many institutions and what liberal politics tout in mission statements and in general programming. And I want to encourage all of us to not only see that reality, but to think about our place within that reality. And again, as a positive, not as a call out, but as a call up. As I get older and as my career shifts away from being directly on the ground, I'm focused on how my work supports those on the ground. As an orchestral musician, how can you position your work and resources to support those whose jobs aren't always safe or aren't as safe as yours? If you're working in development or, let's say, community engagement within an arts organization, can folks like Bamuti, who are on the front lines, look to you when it's time to fill a new position within your organization or to expand your team or to expand your programming to include or platform some of his ideas or folks like him? Maybe you're someone who doesn't work in the arts at all, but you sit on a board of directors or you're a regular patron to one of your local arts organizations. How are you relaying stories like these to people in your spheres who may not actively think about the impact that this administration is having on the arts? And again, please don't hear me saying that Bamuti isn't going to be all right. I personally believe that his impact and resume beautifully sets him up for something even bigger in this moment. But it's the principle of the thing. Lots of folks who are getting laid off from jobs don't have the relative fame and notoriety that he does. Bamuti wasn't the only person laid off from the Kennedy Center after all. But please do hear me say that we can't allow ourselves to not keep things like this on our minds. Things that are out of sight can so easily be out of mind. So that's why I'm doing my part to make sure that this is in sight. And I want you to do the same. Talk about this. Talk about this at your upcoming staff meetings. What does it mean for our jobs as arts administrators to be at risk in moments like these? When you're at the proverbial water cooler, or maybe the literal water cooler, if you're no longer working remote, see what your colleagues think would be a really good material course of action or response from your organization. Maybe you have positions within your organization that are strictly equity aligned or community engagement aligned, or, similar things that Bamuti was doing at the Kennedy Center. If those jobs had to go away, how would the work of the entire organization move forward? How would you engage or maintain those relationships with people who got laid off? I mean, even if you're just among friends and family and politics come up, make sure that the arts are included in dialogues around tariffs and immigration and war and those things that we're always just generally relaying to our current political reality. To Bamuti and all of those recently laid off at the Kennedy Center, if you're hearing this, we love you, we support you, and we owe you debts of gratitude for the sacrifices you've made to keep the arts in this conversation. There is no neutrality here. You're either making steps forward, even if only emotionally, to, resist increasing attacks on artistic freedom, or you're standing on the sidelines as we all wait for our day to come. Let me know if you need help with understanding what your role might be. I think we need to be there for each other in that regard as well. There's no pushing anyone to the side if they aren't quite sure how to resist, if they're just showing up today, or if they've been in the battle for 50, 100 years. Only support and mutual respect are going to move us forward at this point as we find ways to unite so that we can resist as one united company front. Whew, all right. Thank you, as always, for listening to my ramblings, and I'll share more with you again soon. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Let's fight for it. Peace.